So hi there. I would like to give a overview of my blog post. Um, and the post is Reducing the Stress for Those Who Work with Personal and Collective Trauma. So there is no such thing as secondary trauma to the nervous system. Those of us who work with traumatized groups of people, individuals or groups, we call it secondary trauma or vicarious trauma because we know we're working with people who are directly traumatized by some events and we aren't. But our nervous system cannot distinguish primary from secondary trauma. It experiences it firsthand. So if we're dealing with battered women, refugees, homeless, those displaced by war, veterans, whatever it is, our nervous system, after hearing enough of those stories and seeing the impact on people, sometimes doesn't just feel stressed, it feels traumatized. Because working with these people, it's very normal to have strong feelings. Sometimes we're overwhelmed, we might be anxious or angry. And to have those stories and those people around us again and again causes post-traumatic stress. And we want to stop it from becoming post-traumatic stress disorder, especially those of us who work with traumatized people over long periods of time. We don't want to pay such a high price for that work. Our nervous system is always trying to tell us what it wants to do. And sometimes it's overwhelmed, it wants to fight, escape, wants to leave, and of course we don't listen to it. We're helping these people, and at the same time our nervous system is working beautifully and saying, please, protect yourself, and we just continue to work with these people. So we want to have compassion for the people we work with and for ourselves, because if we don't, we pay too high a price, and we want to minimize the price. When you're working with secondary or vicarious trauma, as we often refer to it, self-care, maintaining self-care, we know is very important. But when you're working with large groups of people or over a long period of time, you're working on a sea of trauma, as we call it. And it's like self-care is like maintaining a beautiful life jacket. It's good to have a life jacket at sea, but a lot of us know it's not enough. So we need to form an intentional group of people who are also working with other groups of people who are traumatized and in the realm of collective trauma, because together we can build a lifeboat which is much more resilient and much more effective in reducing the stress of working with trauma. But first, let's talk about the nervous system. A really short overview is what we know now about the polyvagal theory. The nervous system has 3 levels. The top one is hyperarousal, the bottom one is hypoarousal, and the middle section is what we call the window of tolerance. And in the window of tolerance, we can go through the ups and downs of life. And when we're in the window of tolerance, we can stay connected with other people intimately, and we can think clearly, and we can keep our heart open. In hyperarousal and hypoarousal, we cannot do that. We want to stay in the middle zone, the window of tolerance, as much as possible, and I'll give you a couple ideas how to do that. Major symptoms, the 2 major symptoms that you'll find when you're not in a good place, when you're in hyper or hypoarousal, one is when you're feeling stressed and you're feeling alone and disconnected from intimate others and your peers. And the second one, this one's really important, when you cannot think clearly. When you're in hyperarousal, what happens to our thinking is it becomes very narrow focused. We lose complexity, we lose the big picture, and we become hyper focused. That's an indication that our brain chemistry is altered. We can't think clearly, and we are up here in hyperarousal. Our brains aren't working well. In hypoarousal, what happens down here is this is when we become overwhelmed and hopeless and despairing, depressed, and our thinking down here is just fuzzy. We're not dynamic, the brain's not working, and we're just going through the motion. Another symptom that we're in trouble and we need to get into the window of tolerance. I call it the zone of connection because it reminds us that connection is the major way to get back into the window of tolerance. Self-care is good. Quiet in our mind, breathing, we need to do all that. But the most effective and quickest way to get back into the middle zone is human connection. That can be with peers, intimate others, can be wherever it is, but connecting with another person regulates our nervous system much more quickly. So, and when we're in connection, why we want to stay there is it helps us discharge the effects of trauma. For those of us who are therapists, we know that working with clients, it is the connection with them that allows the trauma, when it comes up, to move through them. The frozen feelings, the dissociated emotional impact can heal, not because it's opened up, but because it's opened up with human connection. And we need to have that ourselves, those of us who work with people who are traumatized in a collective world. What happens to so many of us who work with people is we end up having strong emotions, we end up feeling stressed out, but we deny that it's happening to us because, again, we are not the ones who are traumatized. Our clients or the people we're working with are. And a very common impact of that is that we become ashamed of what's happening to us. And shame is always one of the first defenses to trauma. How you push trauma away is you become ashamed of it. So those of us in the helping world and those of us that are therapists so often become ashamed of what gets brought up in us for the reasons I just stated. Sure happens to me a lot. One of the things most of us do, I do it all the time, as an aid worker or as a therapist, is I compare what's happening to me compared to what's happening to them. And I'm always on the short end of who needs attention. But my emotions don't compare themselves to anybody else. My nervous system can't compare itself to anybody. If I'm in stress, if I'm mad, if I'm sad, my body, my emotions, and my nervous system is saying, pay attention. Excuse me, pay attention, because we need something from you. So many of us deny that need. And this is where the healing power of the group comes in. Most of us know we can't go home day after day. A lot of us work apart from our loved ones, but those of us who live close to them, we can't go home again and again and download the stress and the stories of what we're working with. It's just too hard on our loved ones. And so this is where the people, our peer group, is the natural place to turn to. Now, right now, my peer group, I'm part of a triad. There's 3 of us that I've studied with, and one is in Germany, one is in South Africa, and I'm here in Minnesota. But we've worked well enough together, we know each other, and at least every other week we are connecting for an hour and a half talking about trauma. When I'm with them and talk about what's going on with me, they help me have compassion for my own needs and what's going on with me. Their care for me and us being in this little boat together helps me build resilience. The resilience of our boat helps strengthen me. And when I'm in the waves of trauma, when I'm going through a lot with my clients or the groups of people I work with, I can carry those memories in my care of these 2 guys and from them with me. So if you're with a health clinic, a relief agency, an aid group, volunteers, activists, whatever, You want to create a support group, a peer group, if at all possible. What you do to create one of these groups is when you get your group together, you start with a guided meditation, a little prayer, a ritual or something, and you want everybody to drop into their body and feel the connection between you. I call this building the boat. When you get some group of people together, you go into a guided meditation again and you ask everybody to feel the connection with each other. And you might share your values, you might share the goodness of the group, you might call on that, you might call in the consciousness that we are intentionally going to be here for each other, and we're going to stay connected with each other to help us navigate the seas. And you want people to find in their body where they feel the connection, because then it's easier to remember when you're out on the rough seas by yourself. So to understand what builds resilience in trauma work, we have to understand that trauma gets into the body. It's not in your mind. It affects our thinking, our physiology, and it affects our emotions. And we want to build resilience in the body. And this is why we are with a peer group. This is why we want to come back at least every other week if possible, to have time to sit with these people and say, okay, what's come up for you? How are you doing? Are there any stories, anything stuck in you? Do you need our compassion? So, self-care is important, very, very important. But building a lifeboat on the seas is also really important, because the more I trust the people that are in my lifeboat, the more I can articulate what it is that's stuck in me, what it is that's bothering me so much. If I can get past my shame and get in touch with what's coming up, I can let it move through me. In trauma work, always we want things to move through us. So much trauma in the world today. We want to stay on our toes, we want to keep resilient, and we want to keep letting things move through us as they need to. Because we want to remember, we're doing this work we're doing because of the passion we have to serve the people who are suffering. We want to stay clear-headed, open-hearted, and fully human. We don't want this work to cost us our mental health, and we don't want it to cost us our intimate health with other people. So we need to stay up on top of how to care for ourselves. Alleviating suffering in ourselves will not only serve our personal nervous system and our personal lives, but it'll also serve our clients and the groups we work with. They need us to take care of ourselves. The people that we serve tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, need us to take care of ourselves in the powerful work we do. So if we listen to the truth of our body, the truth of our nervous system, we need more connection, we need more support, we want things to move through us because we want to stay fluid and healthy, open-hearted and clear-minded, and fully human. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.